Okay, I think we are ready for the fourth, last but not least session. So we go on with the fourth session. The topic of the fourth session is shown on the screen. The demographic and cultural effect in recruiting high-quality personnel and its impact on money, and the COVID-19 pandemic impact on national defense and security. For the last session, we are very lucky because we have three distinguished chiefs of European armies. Lieutenant General Alphonse Mais, the Chief of the German Army. He will present the topic, the demographic challenge as a threat to modern army's sustainability. Lieutenant General Martin Wijnen, Deputy Chief of Defense and Commander of the Royal Netherlands Army. He will present the topic, developing policies to attract high-quality personnel in the armed forces. And Major General Julian Berdila, Chief of Romanian Land Forces. He will present the topic, the pandemic effects to defense and security. The members of, the speakers will present their presentations from their seat. So, I would like to give the floor to General Mais for his presentation.
Thank you very much, colleagues. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude for the invitation to this forum, which I really highly esteem as a platform for discussion and change of views, and the opportunity to share my perspective on the given topic. And I really have to admit that the topic, the demography challenge as a threat to modern army sustainability, was a hard nut to crack for me. Because this is normally not the day-to-day business, but I think you all would agree that the people is our most valuable asset in all of our armies, and to think from time to time on this topic is really a right thing to do. Unfortunately, upfront I have to apologize, because I have to admit that I have not the 100% solution to deal with the challenge, but I think this is a task of Martin, because in the second briefing, you have to tell us how to solve it. So my pleasure is to describe more or less the challenge, but at the end I would like to touch a little bit on how we in Germany think about it. Yeah, and my thought I would like to structure along three questions. What is demography? What are the main trends and geopolitical implications? What are the implications for military power would be the second part, and thirdly, what is the German approach to face the related challenges? I think it's obviously clear, and I only want to touch on that and summarize this, that the demographic question is at the heart of all major contemporary societal issues. Each area of the world is affected differently by population changes. All countries, or most of the countries, have a very different demographic trajectory. And we can describe them in several points. Explosive population growth in some areas against declines in others contributes to everything from shifts in economic power to resource scarcity to the changes in societal norms. Some societies' populations are aging rapidly, even shrinking, and their workforces will be constrained in comparison to the total population. Other societies are young and growing, which will create even larger labor forces and consumer markets. Useful, growing populations must be fed, housed, educated, and employed for their productive potential to be realized. As the demographic trends are globally different, what are the implications of this? Firstly, national demographics set national priorities for government spending. As populations in the West age, the demand for social services and healthcare will put severe pressure on budget priorities that could compete with or even overshadow defense and security expenditures. Secondly, on the contrary, the concomitant growth in the youth populations in emerging markets and low-developed countries could create increased radicalization and civil unrest and a greater likelihood for disruptive transnational movements to take hold in these societies. This could create both internal and external security issues that will require greater investment and innovative strategies to tackle. Certainly health systems may need to be re-engineered and paid for to handle many more participants in economies which may see declining GDPs. Fourthly, the workforce may need to be retooled in all parts of the world. In the aging economies, older workers will need to learn new skills and work longer, and their work may have to be supplemented by migrant populations. In emerging growth markets, the gaps between supply and demand for those with university-level education will have to be filled. These are just a few very broad implications of a megatrend on our societies we have to keep in mind when asking ourselves, what does this mean for us, the military? Academic literature has examined several types of relationships between overall demographic growth and the tendency of nations to go to war through three perspectives. First, argues that population pressures and fixed land resources may combine to create new causes for war. The second argues that young men will so greatly outnumber young women that young men may be prone to gang violence, or worse, may serve as fodder for future wars by states just as happy to be rid of them. This is very sarcastic. And thirdly, and this is the most optimistic view of the academic world, is arguing that an aging world is a peaceful world, mostly because supporting the elderly draws resources from what would otherwise be spent on military endeavors, and speculatively because the old are not as hormonally prone to violence as the young. This is very optimistic. Who knows what may be the truth? I have no crystal ball, so please allow me to come from the academic level a little bit more to the military point of view. In former times, states that competed militarily bordered one another, and they had comparable technologies available. It was a world in which demographics had a considerable impact on the relative national power. We saw this over a long period, from the French Revolutionary Wars to the end of the Second World War. Circumstances are different today. Conquest rarely wins riches or even security. The world's rich countries, most of the rich countries, are allies today with one another. Rich low birth rate countries generally do not border high birth rate countries. However, nuclear weapons proliferation can serve as an equalizer in keeping poor small nations from being intimidated by larger and richer ones. How do demographics correlate to national power today? To address this, I will focus on three core resources of military power. First one is manpower, second one is money, budget, GDP, and thirdly, national education and the supply of very talented individuals for software and systems integration. The size of a nation's working age population is directly related to all three aspects. Trivial in the first case, manpower, by multiplication with the nation's productivity in the second case, and through the enlargement of the pool from which technical expertise can be found in the third case. Each of these three mentioned elements is not a military strength in itself. It has to undergo a decent, very complicated process to define its contribution and impact when it is converted into military strength. The respective process chain is long, but it all starts with resources, with demography, as far as manpower is concerned. A RAND study some time ago stated the following thesis. Firstly, manpower, money, and to a growing extent, technical experts are all important components in conventional warfare. Over the last 50 years, however, the balance has been shifting away from manpower and toward fiscal resources and especially information, made available by software, in the future artificial intelligence, engineered by smart people, technical experts. Secondly, conventional warfare still requires manpower to a certain extent. Raids and seizures require manpower, with an emphasis on quality in the case of raiders and quantity in the case of defenders. From my perspective, it's not only the rapid development of technological progress which raised the importance of manpower quality. This requirement was also to observe during the last decades of counterinsurgency and stabilization operations, as we spoke of thinking man's wars and discussed the requirement of the strategic private. But constantly and finally, we have to conclude manpower, backed by sufficient logistics, remain important for all military operations and not just in war. Coming to the third part of my brief, I would like to share with you the German perspective on the issue. Once again, the people serving in the army are the most important and valuable factor for the operational readiness and the responsiveness of our land forces. I'm an absolute fan of the quote that armies do not man equipment, but we equip men. As highlighted before, demographic changes in Germany and the growing shortage of skilled workers will have a marked impact on social and economic developments over the coming decades. The Bundeswehr is affected by associated phenomena such as population aging, the thinning out of rural infrastructure, as well as by increasing effects of globalization, digitization, migration, and in the social dimension, an increasing individualization instead of willingness to serve your country whatever it costs. On top of it, we can clearly identify changes in life goals and priorities of young generations, which we have to take into the equation of our recruitment strategies. In December 2019, Martin will remember it, we spent time on this question in a bi-national flag officer seminar with our Dutch colleagues, discussing the issue with a civilian recruitment and headhunting agency on the civilian market in order to understand what are the motivations and life plans of Generation Z and Generation Y and what's the difference between both of them. Before coming to the strategies to tackle this, please just let me give you a brief overview where we come from and what is our current situation. Since the end of the Cold War, personnel numbers in the Bundeswehr have undergone continuous and significant reductions. In '89, the Bundeswehr comprised of 500,000 active personnel backed up by 700,000 reservists coming out of a conscription system. Peak in strength we reached during the reunification process in the early 19th, when the strength of the former National People's Army of the GDR came on top. From that point of time, the politically assumed peace dividend led us on a path of constant reductions in strength and capabilities. The low point was decided in 2011 when conscription was freezed, not given up, it was freezed, and overall numbers were reduced down to 180,000 soldiers as a target line. The army within that was reduced down to 55,000 people organized in 3 divisions. What we have to keep in mind with respect to Germany, that parallel to the reduction of recruitment requirements in terms of numbers, we saw an increased potential for recruitment created by the enlargement of the population basis in the reunification process, and by opening all careers and functions for female recruits in 2001. Since 2014-15, political decision makers have turned onto a new line following the respective NATO decisions in Wales and Warsaw. The new goal of the personnel strength is 203,000 to be achieved until 2029 in an organized and steady influx of new personnel in order to fill up current structures and new capabilities. The Army has benefited from this process already significantly by a reinforcement of nearly 8,000 slots on which we can plan. As an employee, the Bundeswehr tries to respond with flexibility and proactively to all these challenges. Competing for the most intelligent and talented individuals is an important issue for the Bundeswehr. It too is struggling for a good position in the increasingly competitive market of skilled and qualified personnel in a prosperous society and economy. Human resource management for us is of strategic importance, and therefore the Bundeswehr decided to establish its own service area, which is focused on all aspects of personnel management across all military services. Obviously, there are pros and cons to such a centralized approach. On the one hand, this allows for a special focus and creates synergies through the process. On the other hand, it can be seen as a disadvantage, as I am, as a chief of staff, deprived of the possibilities to make decisions on my own and react to current or regional aspects. But it works so far, and having a look at the personal strength, I'm quite optimistic. The German army has currently more or less 60,500 slots to man, and today we have achieved 85% fulfillment, with more personnel in the training pipeline, bringing us to more than 90% within 3 years. This requires a lot of activities and an enduring effort, especially when you keep in mind that every year 6,000 soldiers are leaving the army and have to be replaced, while at the same time we have to manage the growth. Usually, German army soldiers start as temporary career volunteers. In the army, roughly 75% of our service members are temporary career volunteers with contracts from 9 months to 25 years. And only 25% are full career soldiers serving to the rank-related maximum service ages of mid-50s for NCOs, 60 for staff officers, and 65 for generals. Currently, I'm quite satisfied with our personal situation, especially the number of applicants for officers' careers outweighs the number of available slots by far, which underlines that the military and especially the land forces are attractive for young Germans. But overall, there's no room to lay down and let things develop by themselves. A number concerning me a bit is the number of women in the army, which is only 7% of the force. This is not enough and has to improve, as our target line across all services is 15%. And across all services, we have currently achieved 13%. Dear colleagues, from a German perspective, I see the following areas that we need to examine carefully in the years to come, based on the assumption that necessary funding for the envisaged personal strength is provided by the Parliament, which will be a challenge in itself, because as you probably know, we are currently in the process of forming a new government. This will be difficult enough, because as you know, the costs for the last 10, 5 or 2% are increasing by high factors, especially when you look at IT and logistical experts. So what to do? Firstly, we have to rebalance within the German system the equilibrium between recruitment requirements for specific military functions on the one hand, and the costs we have to invest in order to stay attractive for young people in competition with the civilian world and in a changing society. The programs we design for that reason must take development in the society into account, but at the same time keep our demands for a ready military force in sight as far as possible. However, looking, for example, to the requirement of cyber nerds, the old request that every soldier has by definition to be a rifleman will probably not survive. At the end, we have to take the young people as they are, and we will have to invest more in making them fit for purpose, physically and intellectually. Concerning social progress, as we call it, only focusing on personal payment will likely result in us falling short. It has to be a wide array of measures, especially rewarding missions, disposing of obstacles and impediments which discourage individuals from entering the armed forces, especially young women. Secondly, we have to carefully examine where we place our limited number of soldiers. Currently, not all soldiers work in areas where only soldiers are required to contribute to ready military formations. We still have too many soldiers in administrative jobs that could be performed by civilian personnel as well. As I explained before, we need to be attractive for young people to join the army, but that is only the first step. In addition, we need to retain them within our system. This is a major aspect, since training and education, especially for officers, can take years. Therefore, from a military but also economic point of view, we cannot afford to let these people leave the army too early. While on the other side, we do not require every one of them to remain in the army, especially in uniform, for 40 years or more in order to prevent us from overaging, a threat for all professional armies without appropriate mechanisms to dissolve contracts. So what we are currently advocating for is a so-called Bundeswehr internal labor market, which allows us to shift to a much higher degree than up to now, uniformed soldiers, uniformed personnel to civilian contracts and to civilian servant slots. The third area, which obviously can support us in enhancing sustainability under the pressure of demographic challenges, is through technology. Modernization and the introduction of new technologies obviously provides opportunities. Using artificial intelligence and autonomous systems clearly can spare manpower and enhance effectiveness. Exploiting these opportunities will be the task of the next modernization cycles. But as you know it, that this has an ethical dimension, and to abstain from the use of military personnel completely in some fields by sustaining soldiers through autonomous machines, therefore, is not an option. We will always ask for the man in loop. Dear colleagues, let me wrap it up. As Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, as for the future, your task is not to foresee it, but to enable it. Taking demography into consideration is absolutely necessary to tackle the upcoming challenges. Making the correct decisions for the future requires evaluating all the aspects which could have an impact on our military force. Demography is only one. Necessary deductions for demography must, however, always be made in light of a wider framework, including our current and foreseeable security environment and other contemporary phenomena that might have an impact on future birth rates and maybe even death rates of young people. Such phenomena are inter alia the consequences of the pandemic from climate change and technological as well as economic developments. Thank you very much for your attention. That concludes my part.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very interesting presentation. Now, General Weinen has the floor for his presentation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the invitation, dear colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I was as surprised to share a few of the thoughts on this topic with you as General Mais was. But actually, throughout the day yesterday and this morning, it struck me that it is actually a perfect theme. And I will explain why we get to this point. I think the times we are facing are challenging. And in the volatile world we are discussing so far, with a wide variety of threats that emerge within the blink of an eye, our forces must be able to adapt. Adapt to assist in dealing with the COVID pandemic, and General Badila will talk about that in a few moments, but also to adapt to the reception of displaced persons in our home countries. We've discussed that. Adapt to deter, and if and when necessary, adapt to defend our nation's interests. And we can agree that our armies are the last organization standing to protect what we value in these volatile times. Slide, please. Now, this is my command message, and in my command message I address three critical values for the army to pursue. Well, the first one is that I aim for an army that delivers, ready for all tasks, foreseen and unforeseen. And in this era in which the latter is gaining importance, delivering needs a different approach than in the last decades with a more anticipated threat. Traditionally, we fight as we are, but we need another mechanism to increase our operational readiness in a more volatile threat environment. And to deliver, cooperation is vital. Therefore, an army that cooperates is my second value we pursue. Cooperation with partners in the security domain, such as all of us here in this room in Athens, but also partners in the such as commercial enterprises, schools, universities, knowledge institutes, and so on and so on. And in our volatile environment, a whole of society approach to security is fundamental, specifically when threats become less pronounced. And that's what I believe we see now at the borders of the European Union, of Europe. The third value is an army which, with a good working condition, with good working conditions and with an enjoyable work atmosphere, since this is one of the main factors to retain personnel. Investing in good conditions and a good working atmosphere contributes to the Army's ability to deliver. And within these three values, people play a central role, and manning is of paramount importance. Adequate manning, both in numbers and in skills, is key to the readiness of our armies and ultimately to operational success. As General Mice pointed out, demography is not on our side here. An aging population combined with a challenging labor market has resulted also in my country in many vacancies, threatening the readiness of our forces. But I believe there is more to say here. Technological development, as we spoke about yesterday, and General Mice also referred to that, require a different skill set for our future workforce. Most likely, simple tasks will be automated, leaving the Army with more complex tasks requiring other workforce skills. And these skills are well appreciated by the rest of society as well, leading to a substantial competition in the labor market. And this competition becomes more prominently visible in the fast-growing economy, especially, well, particularly from the Dutch perspective, we face in the aftermath of the corona crisis. These phenomena, so that's the reduced available workforce, 2, the scarcity on the labor market, and 3, the increased in complexity of the tasks, might even be called the biggest challenge to the build-up of our armies in the present time. The armed forces have to develop new policies to meet these challenges. And within the Netherlands, this awareness has resulted in an MOD-wide new human resources policy program. And this HR policy program consists of 3 main goals. First and foremost, to boost the individual readiness as one of the critical components to operational success. Second, to improve the attractiveness of the armed forces as an employer. And finally, to improve the usage of skills and qualities of our people. This program is known as the HR transition. And this is a multi-year program that will affect our entire organization. Individuals, units, commanders, and also HR professionals. And it includes the improved toolkit for commanders with new contracts, an improved talent management system, and a new data-driven approach to HR decisions, and the latter including HR analytics and strategic personnel planning. The HR IT systems will be replaced to facilitate that, and the HR organization will be tailored to support this transition. Well, this is a huge program, and today I only will highlight the 3 perspectives in the program that are of interest for this discussion, and which are the organizational, the personnel, and the leadership's perspective. Slide. If we look at the organizational perspective, we relook at the manning of our units. We asked ourselves to what extent each soldier needs to be available on a 24/7 basis. Units with a short notice to move need to be instantly available. However, that is not required for all the units. Scalability of our organization is a valuable instrument to increase the readiness of our forces if and when they are needed. In order to achieve this scalability, we will build our organization on 4 layers. Well, the first layer is simple, consists of the direct available units with a short notice to move and a high operational readiness. The second layer can be found in staff elements, schools, etc., etc. The personnel working in these units are not directly available for operational tasks, but can reinforce the units if and when needed. The third layer are the reservists and the reserve units. These units are only temporarily available, but can be used to build up units still within the NATO requirements of high readiness within 90 days. The fourth and final layer can be found in the cooperation with private companies. Arrangements with these companies can contribute to the operational readiness of the Army, but do not need to be available on a regular basis. In using the layered approach, we seek to increase the availability of units, but only when they are really needed, either for deployment or for training purposes. A good example is our surgical teams. We have a long-lasting partnership with Dutch hospitals where surgeons participate in our surgical teams during deployments. In return, they pick up their civil jobs, update their skill set to the latest medical standards, and at the same time prove to be real ambassadors for the Army. And I will magnify this instrument to a much larger extent in the upcoming years, adding additional combat power to our units. This mechanism is even more beneficial since it is based on cooperation rather than on competition on the labor market, with profits for the Army, profits for the civil employer, and profits for the individual. And the Army gets reinforced with people with the latest civil knowledge. The civil employer contributes to the security of our nation, and the individual combines the best of both worlds. Slide, please. Although the organizational perspective is very important, attracting and retaining high-quality personnel can only be achieved if the Army takes every individual seriously. The personnel perspective, therefore, is paramount to operational success. A new generation, often referred to as Generation Z or Y, and General Mize already referred to that, well, this generation will fill our ranks in the next decade. This generation has a different employment expectations, like development and a proper work-life balance. And in a challenging labor market, fulfilling these expectations will contribute to the demanding success of our armies. Here, policy instruments like new flexible contracts, a talent management program, and an increased focus on diversity can help to attract and retain the required workforce. Flexible contracts give commanders the tools to offer personnel the type of assignment that fit both the unit and the individual. Part-time assignments for instructors at regular Army schools and more demanding 24/7 contracts with a higher payment for soldier within the first layer units illustrate a few of the options available. Secondly, the talent management program will be made available for everyone and no longer for just the top 10%, including the development tools to support it. Employability advisors will have the authority to allocate training programs that support the competence development of individuals fitting their career aspirations. Obviously within the needs of the organization, but with the individual as a starting point. As stated, every individual must be taken seriously, and I'm firmly convinced that diversity in the armed forces is a force multiplier for two reasons. First of all, when we see, appreciate and utilize the different backgrounds, insight and qualities of our workforce, it will widen our thinking and action perspectives, which will result in a better operational outcome. Secondly, considering that 50% of the population are women and an increasing share of young people have a multicultural background, there is a largely untapped labor market potential which we cannot afford to disregard. Therefore, we strive to climb up to the NATO average of 16% of female soldiers in our armed forces in the upcoming 5 years, and continue our commitment to a diverse working force and an inclusive culture where anyone deserves the valuation for their qualities, whatever their background characteristics are. Slide, please. The final perspective is the leadership perspective. As with most of the transitions in our armies, the key to success is within the leadership. Every implemented process, procedure or tool is predestined to fail if not accompanied with the proper leadership behavior. However, leadership can only flourish when leaders have responsibilities and the mandates and the means to execute them. Therefore, budget will be allocated to decentralized commanders to empower them and to directly influence workforce-related decisions. Mission command, not only in the operational circumstances, but also under peacetime conditions, is a significant development. Furthermore, decentralized commanders will have a more prominent role as regional employer, seeking and maintaining contact with companies, governments, and schools. We might even relocate barracks to the proximity of where our potential workforce lives. This will contribute to a better work-life balance, since that is one of the most important triggers for leaving the army. The proximity and the approachability of armed forces in the region will contribute to the attractiveness of the army as an employer. This, of course, has implication for the broadness of commanders' roles, from being a warrior to being a warrior with entrepreneurial characteristics. And of course, the commanders will be supported by HR staffs for that task. This development is one of the key challenges for the upcoming years. It requires an enhanced skill set for commanders to come and a different lens on the role of the commanding officers throughout our organization. Much more outward looking than inward. Slide, please. And on this note, I come to the end of my presentation. I shared with you the role of adequate manning in operational readiness of our forces and the challenges we face to meet the right numbers and qualities. Together we looked at policies to attract and retain high-quality personnel from an organizational, personnel and leadership perspective, policy instruments like scalable units, a four-layer approach to build up the force, new flexible contracts, talent management for everyone, investing in a diverse workforce, decentralizing HR mandates, and introducing mission command in peacetime conditions are amongst the instruments we will use. And that is where I will focus my attention on, improving the outcome, which brings me back to the motto in my command message, which is that we have the drive to be better today than we were yesterday, and tomorrow we really need to be better than today to protect what we value. Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, pending your questions, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, General Weinen, for your insightful presentation. And now, General Berdilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, General Lucis. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity and invitation. I would thank my other colleagues for being present today, and I realize I'm set to close the session number 4, so a lot of them look at you and your schedule for the plane. I will have this perception that, at least in front of you, that I plagiarize a lot, because a lot of my points were previously addressed here, either the questions, answers, or the highly professional presentations that were before me. But I allowed myself to, based on the values that we commonly recognize, I allowed myself to paraphrase the Millian dialogue that we had on the front of the folder here, in saying that the strong proceed to what they can, the weak concede to what they must, but it's only the united who succeed in what they value together. So I think this would be something to take with us, that regardless, allies or partners, when we get together and form, like today, like here, we can produce something that we can all succeed. The topic is very complex always, also for me. To talk about the pandemic effects, of course, I would refer to some that we Romanians had in the Black Sea region, together with some allies and partners. And as a status today, I would like to mention that the land forces in Romania reached closely to 140,000 doses today administered by the land forces vaccination centers. In total, 32 vaccination centers managed by personnel from the land forces. We already started the booster, or the third vaccination dose as we know it. Approximately in personnel numbers, we're talking close to 80,000 civilians and military relatives of our soldiers. So we had to take that responsibility to produce the relevancy in a crisis that was, like General Kostarakis mentioned, the 3 indicators of the crisis were so fast, so emerging, and very destructive to our nations. I would like to divide my short presentation into the effects that the pandemic generated to defense and security, and then address a little bit the demographic that both General Mais and General Vision and Martin they both addressed during their presentation too. So, number one, for security and defense dynamics and the context where the pandemic hit in Romania, we had to focus or to reshift the focus towards the national effort to counter the pandemic. The context, most of you know it in Romania. We're in the Black Sea region, so the security and defense context is very responsible. The land contributes to that deterrence and defense approach and to the coherence of the Eastern posture between the Baltic, the Black Sea, and the Mediterranean. We also pay attention to the responsible posture that we have together with allies and partners between the Black Sea and the Balkans. So when the pandemic hit, you have to realize that this added something to so many challenging projects that we had and the solutions that we were seeing at that point for the years to come. We had numerous cases of first responders in the initial period for the pandemic. I can tell you that the Army was called because of the density and distribution of the national territory to go infuse the villages, the rural sites, to make sure we have a situational awareness. So one of the question is, how do you IPB a pandemic? How do you censor what is your ISR in the pandemic? How do you read what's coming from the terrain? And that was very difficult, but we had to use the human factor to go to the villages and actually build new SOPs for reports. We had to develop a new command and control structure tactically with other agencies. I can tell you, I traveled by myself to visit some of the, we call them presence points, and I can see a soldier, a gendarme, and a Minister of Interior representative. And guess what? I realized there was an education package difference between the officer from the Minister of Interior, the NCO from the gendarme, and the enlisted from the Army. We had to cope with that balance of what is the competency set for such a patrol to be able to cope with the pandemic results. It did indeed boost interinstitutional cooperation. I can tell you, we were so lucky and so happy to see that major acquisition programs for CIS between the Minister of Interior and Minister of Defense actually worked. We had almost the same networks, so we can provide this battle rhythm and reporting volume to on the base of common CIS. We did enjoy a boost to public trust. The initial response, and this is something for the armies to have, I would say, forever. This is a value that we need to protect. We need to be relevant at a time of crisis in the eye of the citizen. And I think we have this advantage to be there. Most villages and small and large cities in Romania really appreciated, after the initial visualization of soldiers on the street, they realized this is for their help. Number two, after security and defense dynamics, I would address a little bit of readiness and operational effects from the pandemic. We had to redirect roles 1 and 1+ from medical capabilities to the pandemic effect. This took away a little bit of our certification exercises that we had, brigade and below. And I would go back to the approach that General Division proposed to go from bottom up. When you play with a tactical unit, it's very, yes, you can be relevant today, next week, but you have to be aware that you need to regenerate the resources that you put in. So when we took away some of the medical capabilities from the brigades, we had to reconsider what's the regeneration capacity that I have at the Land Forces headquarters. Training, the initial blow of the pandemic was, I would say, critical because it forced us to look at the cycles of multinational exercises. And let's recall, for some of the NATO allies and partners participating, Defender Europe, under the lead of General Cavalli and United States Army Europe and Africa. Defender Europe 20 was so expected for training objectives that we all had at that point. And we had to adapt some of it but still not cancel it. There's a state actor that some of us, we well know it, did not cancel Zapad. So a cancellation, look at the effect of what pandemic can do to your training relevancy in the eye of the political decision maker, to say, well, probably need to cancel the exercise, and then you go back with the arguments that this is readiness, this is what we need to maintain. We got to the point in 21 where this triad of exercises, Defender Europe 21, Dacia, which was a national exercise, Dacia 21, and Steadfast Defender 21, they all came together, and it wasn't about the numbers. We moved away to compare exercises like mass accumulations of soldiers and equipment. No, it was well above 12,000 troops, but the learning training objectives and the learning apparatus of our armies, I think was very successful for what we trained in these three exercises. In parallel, inside our nation, we have to be to look pertinent and very gentleman agreement. We promised we recertified 282nd Mech Brigade. We promised to offer recertification for the operational reserves for some of the EU missions, including the Balkans. So those cannot be moved aside. I think they have to be considered as priorities in the budgets, and the pandemic needs to go in parallel with that. Let's not forget we had to organize, execute all the operations of coming back from Afghanistan and the recycling of that effort. We had to do it. Militarily, I think it was a success. I think we provided together, again, united, some of the means and ways for the common ends that we planned for. To close a little bit the part of the readiness and operations, I think that we need a new mission set in this complex environment. So we have hybrid threats and challenges. We have some subversive. We have some classical ones. And then from time to time, we have like the pandemic. So what is the mission set of a new, let's say, mechanized brigade? How do we include the training for counter-pandemic operations? Do we learn from this and produce the doctrine to institutionalize into the training centers? Or we just leave it at the tactical level to cope with that? I think the multi-domain approach to this may have some solutions already on the table, for including the time framework for 2030. Last but not least, Martin talked about this a little bit, leadership. And leadership development is so critical for how we see ourselves and the young generation coming to assuming this position. A leader in the future, I would say, needs to prioritize his or her own career, to be value-based, to be technologically skilled at the individual level, and the types of generations Alphonse mentioned in his presentation. I lost the count. I don't know Z, Y. I don't know what's coming. But what is common, I think, the cycle of technology influences so much the dynamics of how the leaders stay on the market in a professional manner. Last chapter of my short presentation, I'll address a little bit the demographic and the cultural effects. And let's face it, for the land forces, the human resource remains the main acquisition program that I think we need to capitalize on. Other services, our brother services, can go for technology, sometimes more expensive than what we have. But if we don't preserve, develop, and capitalize the human resource, I think the land forces may be in trouble. The other factor is, I personally think that Europe remains a land decisive dominant theater. So how the land domain will come together by 2030 depends on what we commonly address today and how versatile we build the NATO or the national force structure and even the command and control force structure. Obviously, the context, more diverse and highly technological young generations, basins. We discovered that for enlisted personnel and that selection basin, I think around the brigade level units, we can produce a much better communication strategy to attract. So it's easier for us, at least in Romania, for some of the brigades to select and recruit if you give them that mission set to be able to echo more the military professional values. So we have to open some of that level, the brigade and below, to communicate with the local communities and attract, especially for enlisted. We still have a highly mobile human resource, and being in a European framework, the labor force moving in Europe, it's so fast and agile, even during the pandemic. And we consider their agility a challenge for us because it's difficult to attract to our profession someone who seeks a professional comfort. They want to work from home. By the way, the IT environment today, most of the contracts, one of the first questions is, can I work from home? Well, that's obviously a contrast to our profession when you can't have an officer working from home. What's some of the options? Well, we need to invest, I said, in the professional culture. Where do we start? Do we go to the high schools? Do we go to the universities? Do we actually promote this principle of collective participation to defense? Other budgets from other institutions can contribute. And it's hard sometimes inside the government to convince the bureaucracies that they can contribute to security and defense. Education, part of the education budget can contribute to that if they start communicating how important the security and defense domain is for the future of the nation. In such light is how do we build the narrative together? Is there a strategic communication package that we have with the land forces that we go for the societies? How well is this promoted, and what is our architecture or the organization that we put to that? Is it public relations? Do we need to adapt our headquarters of the land forces to be able to plan and execute something like this? Challenges ahead a little bit for the recruitment. What is a brigade? And again, great presentation from Martin Vision before me. What is a brigade in 2030? How much of that is unmanned? Is there a mixed company between an unmanned platoon and a manned platoon? What is the equipment of the company, and what is the personnel skill set to produce readiness for such a capability? Also, as we all are aware, there's a high technology arsenal coming into our force structure. Cyber and CIS, just two examples. We started to have common approaches. We started to have private-public projects with some of the companies, IT companies, to invest in some sort of professional development for our cadets and the land forces. It's still a project. They want to see what's the dividend for that, especially for the private. Do they get to employ the officer after he or she retires? So a lot of questions for that, but I think there's some good perspectives for how to get some solutions. Do we need to adapt the peacetime, wartime legacy? What is a reservist? What is a conscript in 2030 with a package skill, trained and educated by the Army? Is that by the Army, or society will pick up on that? So there are so many issues in the human domain that I think technology on one side pushes us to modernize, but it's our awareness too to find some solutions. Recapitalize the training capacities. Example, what we have with the Joint Multinational Training Center in Grafenweer, the Readiness Center in Hohenfels, and the National Training Center Complex in Chinku, it's such a backbone to maintaining readiness. Can this backbone modernize? Yes, and it's also a vector of successful projects. How do we go from software of simulation and training update it by to go to 2030 and the new technology that comes into our fielding. Lots of questions in that, but I think what we had until now, together with the multinational exercises, needs to remain and consolidate. A little bit of the last but not least, the force structure that we have at our planning and organization, and also to cycle for better readiness, especially for us, Romania and the Black Sea region. We have battle groups, we have NATO force structure, we have headquarters, we have affiliated units. I think there's enough in that to not to say that it's too complicated, but I think there's a good platform to maintain the relevancy of the land domain and the operations to come. I would close in, again, thanking General Lucis for a successful forum and for allowing us to exchange some of the ideas. I hope I did not make any plane canceled or flight, so you can still catch that. I hope to see you soon and exchange again. Like I said, only the united can succeed together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, General Berdilla. Now we have time for any questions or comments, maybe. Yes, please. Okay, the Chief of the Portuguese Army, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear generals. First of all, I would like to thank the very good presentations from Generals Mais, Wynan, and Berdilla. I would like to share with you some experience in Portugal. In the last decade, the Portuguese Army had a decrease of personnel, so in volunteers mainly. So we established a program with 3 R's. The first R is to recruit, the second is to retain, and the third is to reintegrate. As far as the first area, key area is concerned, recruiting, we had our motivation in a very big orientation towards the new generations, the young generations, also a female priority. As General Wynan said, we have a very good percentage of female personnel, so we could increase. In that moment, we are increasing the percentage of female personnel. And the capability to attract, we could say that we could talk about salaries. Of course, they are very important. We have the competition with the civilian jobs. And most of all, the utility of the armies. So not only the prestige, but if the armies are used when they are needed, it's very good to attract people as volunteers to the armies. The second key area is to retain personnel. So in the Portuguese armies, we focused on the careers, or longer or shorter careers. We envisaged the possibility of contracting longer than is currently possible. Normally, we don't have conscription, so the contracts of soldiers, for instance, are currently 6 years, and we are trying to increase to 18 years or even for a complete career during their military life. And the engagements to retain people, and of course, we military are used to be engaged not only in military missions, as we saw in the pandemic situation. Of course, for the military is to retain people, not only volunteers, but also permanent personnel. We have to qualify. So we had a very good focus on the qualifications of personnel during the whole career, not only officers, NCOs, but even soldiers. The last area is to reintegrate. The importance of the society recognition of the added value of the military, and to be integrated in society, even if they are a little bit young, to return to the society and to integrate new jobs as civilians. As far as, for instance, the young people are concerned, even 6-year contracts, we are trying to give them the best qualifications to return to society. These are my shared thoughts with you concerning the Portuguese experience. Thank you.
Thank you, General Fonseca. I think General Zervakis wants to take the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Alphonse, Martin, Julian, as well as you, Jose. And I think it's a timely session, actually. It's a continuation from our previous discussion that we had. For me, it was very intuitive. I learned some things here, and, well, we have similar, actual experiences. And what I say, I agree with the force-level approach that was presented by Martin. Different, however, every nation has different defensive and security concerns, but it was right, it's on the right balance. The issue we have today is, first of all, about the balance about what we have as conscripts and the one that we have professional soldiers. So what is the right balance? When you look at the new systems, and we need professionals to compete, and this needing professionals goes to another level. We need to compete to the open market. We need to compete to the public sector. And Alphonse put it right there. So we have to have incentives to keep the right manpower when we need it. What we saw, and this is practically now during the COVID period, and when there is always a financial crisis, we see the level of volunteers to become professional getting higher. As soon as the crisis is out, then we have people coming out, not at the level of 6,000 per year as it was displayed by Alphonse, but we have a high number of professionals going out the army. And this leakage is important for us and for our operational availability. On the issue of the COVID, within Cyprus, due to maybe because of our size, we work interchangeably with the police and other agencies, so we did not feel we are interoperable in many ways, so we did not feel that difference that it was faced in other countries. But we felt that we were, let's say, higher relevance than in other cases, and high in the respect of the people. So by and large, I have to say that I agree, we have to find the right incentives to keep the professionals that we need in the armed forces, and make as well, see who has to go out of the army, because in reality, we cannot keep them all because they're going to get aged in the end. So I think everyone on the table is a different equation to solve. And thank you for this interesting discussion. Thank you.
Any other question, please? Or remark? Oh, yes, sorry. The Chief of the Estonian Army.
Thank you. I will do my best effort to ask a short question, or actually to ask a question. Nevertheless, very interesting presentations. When it seems that all of us have very similar challenges: recruitment, retainment, and there are still numbers of jobs unfilled in all our military. So it is a real and present challenge. However, and I did just my research by using the source of all knowledge, Wikipedia, just a second ago. When I looked at the Royal Netherlands Army numbers before Second World War, the fact remained still there that you were able to field hundreds of thousands of people, and now we're all struggling just few tens of thousands of people. So my question, and maybe a little bit of provocation, is it really a demographic issue? Also, when I look towards Germany, is it really a demographic issue, or is it something else? Is it a changed threat perception? Of course it is, yes, probably. But is it also misunderstanding of what military should and can actually do? When we look at our international operations, it seems that sometimes people understand that we are military, but military police. And sometimes we are doing development and government and not security. So my question, sorry for a long introduction, is that do you feel that it is possible to tackle those questions, the threat perceptions in your respective countries? Or would it be easier to just create better work conditions and do recruitment and retainment by those means? Thank you.
Well, to give you an answer, I think predominantly it's the lack of the proximity of any threat. Full stop. And I can expand and I can add, and there's anything else, but in my fine nation, and it's a perfect nation to live, and the population is happy, it has really to do with the fact that and we have been lucky, for so many years, we haven't had any threat to the population. But that's not the only thing. I think that is maybe the ground reason why we don't establish the conscript system anymore. So the defense of the nation has not been perceived as a whole of nation effort like it is in the Baltics or in Sweden or in Norway, where you literally feel the proximity of Russia, to be honest. But what we also have seen over time is that, General Bedila already referred to the other services where you see lower manning requirements because technology steps in. Well, the same applies to the land forces, to a lesser extent and maybe a little bit slower. But we will see the robotics, we will see the implications of technology, AI, but also the mechanization of our work is still ongoing. So we have to a lesser extent those people available. So you see the reduction of the numbers, and as soon as we are called upon, there's still, that's the third element within society, the idea that the armed forces is a massive organization, and in particular the army. What we usually do is compare it to how many people we are still able to fill in a stadium, a football stadium. So everyone knows the football stadium, and so, well, prior to 89 to when the wall fell, we were able to fill with full-time officers and NCOs. The Feyenoord Stadium in Rotterdam is almost 70,000, and nowadays we can't even fill the Twente Stadium where I live, and it's less than 30,000. So that's just to make people aware that we are not that massive organization anymore, and we don't need those numbers, to be honest. So with the mix of layers and build-up and the mix of reservists and also the new generations, they look differently at what we require. We come up with this layered approach to man the organization. And there's also some positives. Normally we share all concerns, but there's also something positive. I think we are, as a generation, we are the digital immigrants, the generation Y, Z, whatever, the young people, they are digital natives. So what we require from our future force is already internalized in those young people. So they're much easier to interact with all the new technology. So there is still hope. One thing I didn't mention, that's the final piece. We're in the process of forming up a new administration, and as service chiefs, we made a point that we are too exhausted to properly fill the organization, man the organization, but to get to the operational readiness levels that we deem necessary. We may be small, but what we bring needs to be up to standard and needs to be dominant, operational relevant, and you know all the descriptions that comes with that, and we don't at the moment. And one of the reasons why we are not able to man is that the military is underpaid. So what we did, we went out in the public, and which is uncommon in our system, that service chiefs go in the paper and tell what the concerns are, and say, well, we need this amount of money to just fix the armed forces, and that includes the salaries and also the terms on which we recruit people, to retain people, and that's why my third pillar in my command message is so important. I want to have people that are not only what they like to work, but they all have the money to make a living out of that. So it's, to me, that's a combination of also important arguments, but the biggest one is, in the Netherlands, the lack of the proximity of any threat.
I would like only to add on what Martin said, and I fully share his view, but when I look to Germany, it's really, I think we lost something by freezing the conscript system. So the visibility of the armed forces in the society is reduced. And Chris and we discussed when we had Defender, I think it was 2020, and we saw military convoys going through Germany, which were an everyday adventure, or which we had until '89. This was really new in Germany, or was a new impression. So I think we lost something there, and it really takes a lot of effort to close this gap. And the second one is, and I mentioned it very briefly, is the cost of the last 10%. Because we can clearly identify that we have areas where recruitment is no problem, I would say, in the new federal state, so what we gained in reunification, while we have Bavaria, southern Germany, where the industry is booming, and we are in competition on the young people, and especially we see those in IT services, logistics, and we invest a lot of money in sending those young people to universities, and we realize that after they have their master degree, they are bought out of the army by industry, because they are very valuable in the scarce resources. So, and the threat issue, I totally agree with Martin.
Yes, please, sir.
Just a short add to the answer. Obviously, yeah, the threat remains important, especially for the Black Sea region, but it has to be more than that. And you pointed out, we talked a little bit outside, you pointed out that how do we communicate with the young generations? I think we need to give them something important for their future, not for our present. And I think modernization programs, i.e. HIMARS, okay, we just got the 1st Battalion on the IOC point. That attracts a lot the young generations. When they know you have equipment and technology that is very modern, they have an incentive, let's put it this way, and they know that's going to be relevant in the future.
Okay, I think we have concluded the 7th forum, the briefings. So at this point, I would like to invite the Chief of Hellenic Army General Staff, Lieutenant General Haralambos Lalousis, to address his closing remarks. Sir.
Thank you. Honorable Chief of European Land Forces, Honorable Commanding General of the United States Army in Europe, Africa, representatives of the European Land Forces, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, the 7th Forum of the Commanders of the European Armies is over. I would like to point out that this conference was very productive for many reasons. First of all, we met each other again after 2 years. We shared ideas and experience, and we took another step to build mutual confidence. On the other side, our distinguished speakers highlighted the important aspects of the issues, providing knowledge that food for thought. I want to thank you all for them. And finally, the discussions offered as an opportunity for questioning. All the above indicate the success of the forum. And now, I have the privilege to announce that the next conference, the 8th Forum, will take place in Paris, France. Please, let's applaud for our good friends and wish success in the next forum. I would like to thank you all for your participation and for your contribution of this outstanding event. Thank you. I would like to mention before for any successful effort, there is some people that work hard. So I would like to thank you, my staff, that work hard with professionalism and passion to this forum be successful. Special thanks to the leader of the efforts on my left side, Major General Christos Boufis, and my right side, Brigadier General Manolis Hadis. Thank you. I'm very proud for my staff. Thank you again for joining this forum. Thank you for contributions. And, I wish success in the next forum.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the 7th forum is concluded. As Lieutenant General Lalousis mentioned, the next forum will be conducted in France, not in Paris, but in Strasbourg. Okay, this is something that the French delegation announced yesterday. So, we would like to thank you all for your participation. It was really a great honor and pleasure for all of us to host you here in Athens. We wish you all a nice trip back to your country and see you again next March, please. Next March in Strasbourg, in Paris, in France. Sorry. Thank you very much.